Hi, everybody. Richard Tromans here again, Artificial Lawyer TV, and also in the guise as chair of the Legal Innovators UK conference, which is taking place in London, November 6th and 7th. And we're doing another special preview of one of our participants, Zach Abramowitz. Hey, Zach, good to have you on the show.
Hey there, Richard. Great to be here.
Now, as you know, Zach has spoken several times at Legal Innovators events, and he was here last year for the London event. Just to get us sort of started, I mean, how do you think things will have changed from last year, so November 2023, to November 24, which is coming up? And what of, particularly around AI?
Sure. And before I answer that question, just to note, I'm pretty, discerning with with which conferences I go to and why do I go and why I go to them. And just to note, because this is my going to be now my 22, 23, 24, my third Legal Innovators conference. In London. I was at the one in San Francisco this year. So I've been coming back frequently, and I think there's just for people who are considering whether to come or not, some factors to consider. First of all, I think the conferences, Richard, I think you do a great job at being current, right? So you're going to see, because of all the companies that you cover and your coverage during the year, we typically are meeting some of the most cutting edge companies and startups, and it's an absolutely great place for people who are looking at the market to get a better sense of what's going on in AI. It's second to none. The other thing that I would say, and what makes your conferences a little bit different, and part of why I choose them, is they are single track content, meaning everyone is there in the room learning and sharing. It is not like a sort of overwhelming conference with multiple tracks and you've got to sort of choose, and it's disparate audiences. Everyone's kind of in it for the day, and it feels very businessy, meaning people are there. I like to say I like to stay away from the flashing lights conferences and focus more on the notebook and pen conferences. This is very much the latter. This is a place where you can easily justify stepping away from the office, not because you're going to have fun. It's going to be interesting, but you're going to accomplish more in one day learning about where AI is in legal, versus if you were to spend maybe 4 to 6 weeks researching that same topic. So this is really an important shortcut, and I use it that way. And I can tell you that companies that I've introduced to my clients, or companies that I've spotted and continued to, like, maintain a connection with, a lot of them have come from Legal Innovators. So I'm fairly discerning. Now, going back to your original question, which
Mhm.
is how are things going to be different at this year's conference than they were at last year's conference? So I think, first of all, let me talk about the difference between 22 and 23. When I
Mhm.
spoke in 2022 at Legal Innovators, one of the main points that I made was the reason that lawyers are not adopting your tools is not just because they're old and conservative and musty and dinosaurs, and they don't want to change, they don't want anything new. In fact, they will gladly use your products, but the product has to be really delightful, really amazing, really transformative. And I gave very specific examples of where there was adoption of certain tech, but it was in products that were like uniquely transformative. In 2023, this was almost obvious, because after people seeing Chat GPT for a year and having a lot of people adopt these tools, all of a sudden this was not a hard case to make anymore. And now the question was more like, which generative AI tool are we going to use? Because obviously these products are amazing. Where I
Mhm.
think 23 and 24 is different is there's now been a year of experimentation. And I think that for some people, the way that transformer models work is just so transform truly transformative, right?
Mhm.
And such a paradigm shift that people haven't quite been able to wrap their minds around it. And I think that what we're finally seeing is like a collective initial eureka moment of lawyers and of legal, where they say, "Oh, okay, that's what I can use it for. Maybe not this, but this, right? And I think that that's where we are right now. We're a year and a half, almost 2 years into the experiment of legal
Mm.
with generative AI. And I think we're starting to see an initial group who's really caught on and who's really leveraging these tools in amazing ways. And
Mm.
then others who are a little bit laggard and maybe got frustrated with their first couple of use cases and just decided, no, I'm going back to the way I do things the old way. But I think that more
Mm.
and more we're going to see this kind of K shape where you have certain attorneys who are going this way with AI and certain attorneys who continue to stick their head in the sand and move in that direction.
Yeah, and I think, as we were discussing off camera just before, I mean, for me, really, the big challenge now is going to be getting into precision, into accuracy, into building sturdy, reliable workflows. And I think that's where the legal tech companies come in. And I know a lot of law firms and some in-house teams have just put a wrapper around GPT-4 or whatever. And that's cool, that's fine. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of value you can get from that. But eventually it is limited because it hasn't been fine-tuned, it hasn't been structured, it hasn't been sort of formalized in a way that will work in very, very specific use cases, because that's what the law is all about, very specific use cases. It's not a generalist subject. It's very, very, very narrow workflows that are very specific and have very demanding regulatory barriers around them.
Yeah. And
And that has to be got right. And I think we're going to see almost like a two-level thing. And like I say, it's rather like you could say it's rather like tapping into Google, picking up some information, going into Wikipedia, picking some information, and then going to the British Library and digging out the authoritative tomes written by whoever and spending a long time understanding and reading them. And I think that both of those approaches are cool. But I think people need to realize that there's a difference between a sort of general layering and very specific hard workflows.
yeah, and I think that the terms AI and automation have
Mm.
kind of always gone together. And I think what you were just describing, is automated workflows, which I
Mm.
think we're discovering that like the AI is not necessarily the greatest at doing, but it
Not
is
not yet. Well,
not
and
not
that
not and not
then
necessarily yet, but
mm,
ultimately that doesn't sort of deduct from like the power of the tools. Meaning sometimes like as I say, you're better off using a pogo stick to cross the street than you are a space shuttle, right? It doesn't mean that the shuttle is not significantly more powerful. It just means it's not specifically tailored for this use
mm.
case.
But well, then
Yeah,
that's when I think when we get to the use of agents, and also we were talking off
yeah,
camera, coming sort of having a more machine learning approach. But I think this is one of the things is the generative AI, people have a tendency to use it. They ask it a single question, they might refine it, they might refine their prompt a little bit, and then they tend to leave it. But of course, if we're really going to change the business of law, we've got to get into the workflows, and that means using agents. I think that agents are going to become
yeah.
increasingly important.
And it's certainly something I'm going to be looking at. I think,
Mm.
as I mentioned before, one of the reasons I come to your conferences is to meet the startups. Admittedly, over the last 2 years, when we saw as a company, when we saw the transform model take hold with the launch of Chat GPT, we paused all investments because I thought to myself, I have no idea who is going to win here. And Eric Schmidt, the
Mm.
co-founder of Google, recently said something similar at a conversation at Stanford Business School. But what he followed that up with is he said, I'm therefore investing in everything. Right. So I don't have the kind of cash that Eric Schmidt has. So for me, as I've said, very publicly, my big AI bets have just been in Tesla and in Nvidia because I really had no idea who's going to win in legal. I'm shifting on this, and this is part of why I'm very excited, to
Mm.
start meeting the startups because I
Mm.
think that there are startups that have now had the benefit of these last 2 years, so that they can now do two things. They can say we have a very good understanding of what the transform model is good at and what it's not good at, and we can craft products from scratch with that in mind. So that's step one. So agents you talked about before, better RAG techniques, and all of the stuff. Maybe like a product that's less based on fine tuning, which we've seen is really a mixed bag. On the other hand, I think what I'm really excited about is what is that sort of version two of startups that says, listen, now that AI exists in the form of like, the GPTs and the Claudes of the world, what else? What's like the next step? What's the next business that you can now build that you just never would have dreamed of before, right? So, like, I think in terms of the internet, the internet was originally BBC.com, which is
Mm,
essentially like the BBC News, just like you could find it in a different place, but it wasn't truly transformative, only in the delivery. But then, like a company like Uber or Netflix or Airbnb, things you just would never in a million years have dreamed could be business, or the idea of like influencers. Now I think we're at that second stage where we're going to start to see companies that are building and they're saying, I'm not building an AI, I'm building this business because AI has enabled it.
mm.
And that's what I'm really excited to see.
No, totally interesting. Well, we've got to leave it there. But just one last point. If people are at the conference, they can get, or people would like to come to the conference, you can get your tickets from the website, which is legalinnovators.co.uk. And if you'd like to try and catch up with Zach, Zach will be there. Zach, how can people reach you?
Absolutely. So just easiest way is to email me, Zach, Z-A-C-H, at killerwhalestrategies.com.
Fantastic. Really looking forward to seeing you there and welcoming everyone to the events. Thank
Looking
you.
forward to seeing you.